Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on the world of big data. Today, my guest is from EnterpriseDB. We have the CEO of the company, Ed Boyajian. Ed, welcome to the show today.
Hi, Rich. Good to be here.
Well, thanks for coming on, Ed. Now, I know you guys aren't, focused on big data per se, but data management is all about, that's what your bread and butter is it not?
It is, yeah. We bring to market a commercial version of the open source database Postgres, and we're the product and segment leader in that in the Postgres category.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, well, Ed, why don't we do this? Let's go through your slides, and we'll do a Q&A at the end. Sound good?
Great. That's great, Rich. Thanks. So the topic for today is really to explore where Postgres is in adoption in enterprise and the progress that's been made over the last few years and how important we see Postgres becoming to companies and organizations who have to address pretty substantial needs for data management. And the topic of the presentation today is Postgres at a tipping point. And if you go to the second slide, I want to use that as a way to just comment on this idea of a tipping point, because as you may know, Rich, and many of your listeners would know, Postgres has been an open source project for many years now. The database has been around for over 20 years. I think the formal open source project is passing its 15-year anniversary this year. And as a result, it's had prolific use, and people have become very aware of what the technology is and what it's done. And we talk about this change as a tipping point because I think if you look at this definition, it's the culmination of a wide range of small changes that are affecting a very big change in the relational database market. And so we're going to talk about those series of small changes that are impacting the market that surround Postgres. One that's worth commenting on, and I'm sure many of the listeners have been paying attention to the database market, and even in the big data market, you hear stories of the proliferation and the use of Postgres expanding. We've certainly experienced that here at EnterpriseDB. We now have over 2,000 government and enterprise customers, and if you dig into that a little bit, you start to see some pretty impressive use cases of Postgres. There are a few represented here on slide 3. With you've heard, as Microsoft acquired Skype, it put Skype in the news a little more directly. Skype runs entirely on Postgres. Facebook purchased Instagram for over $1 billion last year. Instagram runs entirely on Postgres. And you see more and more examples, recent news of Salesforce getting more active with Postgres, that really is driving a better awareness. Now, we're also contributing to that as we add customers and expand our base. We spend more time sharing case studies of users of Postgres. But I think these particularly larger public experiences people have had and get to witness help drive understanding of the progress that we're making with Postgres. We've done some survey work recently, and you'll see here on slide 4 that the things that are driving Postgres adoption may not be particularly surprising. The market is plagued, as you would know. It's a $30 billion market. It is notable because the three big vendors, Oracle, Microsoft, and IBM, combined share 95% of that market. And when you dig below the surface, there's a strong reason for that. The inherent nature of linkage between applications and databases make databases very, very sticky. And because they're very, very sticky, the sensitivity to price, while people are feeling the pressure about the prices they're paying, database vendors can raise prices a lot more easily than maybe in other segments because it's hard to change that. And what we're seeing, one of the big drivers for adoption of Postgres, as you can see here, is heavily focused on lowering overall IT spend. There are other factors. People aren't happy with their vendor. The idea that open source has become a strategic requirement for companies, not just a nice to have idea, but now something that's become strategic. And I think in some ways those are closely related to lowering the overall IT spend. And it shouldn't be surprising given the relative amount of a typical budget that Oracle or other relational database consumes. And we've seen studies from Forrester that suggest an IT software budget may be consumed by as much as 33% on the database spend alone. And that's just become too burdensome to accommodate by most companies. And they're acting on this concern that they've had now, which has really been around for years. But as Postgres has gotten better, and we'll talk about that in a minute, we see customers acting much more actively and aggressively on that now. And if you look on slide 5, you get a handle on one of the reasons why it's time to start thinking about that. The cost savings in a solution that's Postgres-based is extraordinary. And this particular example is some work that HP did with EnterpriseDB in promoting some of their solutions to market. We're seeing a really important transformation at the cost line by deploying Postgres solutions. And that isn't news to people who've used open source solutions before, but people who haven't studied the relational database market opportunity for open source, it may be interesting to note how much performance you can get for how little price. And I think it's at that line that we're starting to see companies really change their thinking. And it's one of the reasons why we now have over 2,000 customers. What used to be a technology that may have been considered casually, I think is now very seriously the alternate open source choice in enterprise deployment. If you look at slide 6, you see a little more there. I won't read the quote, but 71% of those that we surveyed saved 40 to 51% in their first year deploying Postgres plus Advanced Server, which is the product that we bring to customers. So, those numbers are impossible for companies to ignore. I think it was potentially easier when the performance attributes of Postgres lagged the big guys like Oracle and others more substantially. But since the latest couple of releases, in particular the 9.0 release, the technical advances have come at an accelerating rate, and I think that's bringing more and more people into Postgres. I'll come back to that point in a minute, Rich. Go to slide 7, and you'll see another corroborating point that, in fact, now Postgres has graduated from what I'll call kind of auxiliary applications, non-mission critical, to being much more central to the data center. And so 61% of those that we surveyed created or migrated mission-critical apps to Postgres plus Advanced Server. And I think this is an important statistic. We've been at this for a number of years. I came to EnterpriseDB 5 years ago, and I would say, honestly, 5 years ago, a lot of the early experimentation with Postgres was in non-mission critical lanes, which got people comfortable with the technology and comfortable that they could get the quality of support from EnterpriseDB that they'd come to expect from Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, and others. And now that we've proven that point and the technology's improved, we're seeing the migration to mission-critical technologies, mission-critical applications. We dig in a little bit to that technical advances, and here's a long list of enhancements to Postgres that I think a lot of the listeners will appreciate. As we've grown, as the technology's grown, performance has been a top of mind priority, not only for the community, but for our developers here at EnterpriseDB, who represent some of the strongest developers out of the Postgres community, who happen to work here with us in the company. And you can start to see that the idea of scalability to multiple cores, the idea of that scalability becoming linear, now puts Postgres in the fat part of the opportunity set from a pure technology, performance, scalability, and scalability perspective. I think if you go to slide 9, you'll see another important aspect of why organizations are adopting, in our case, Postgres plus Advanced Server, and it relates specifically to how easy it is to migrate an application from one database to the next. And this is the source of lock-in for many of the companies. As you know, the procedural languages that are, the PL SQL language that Oracle uses in order to migrate an app means you need to rewrite parts of those applications. We've added some IP to Postgres that make that a little easier to do with our Oracle compatibility technology, which enables companies that are running on Oracle in particular to migrate those apps with minimal or no changes to the application itself, and making that whole process easier. By making it easier, we also take out costs and we take out risk, and I think that's a big driver. And here you can see over 51% of the customers that we surveyed had little, slight to no modifications necessary in the applications. And again, the key to remember is that takes out cost and that takes out risk. And I think that's a big enabler for people to consider changing from Oracle to Postgres. If you look at slide 10, Rich, you'll see the other side of that is how fast is a migration? How easy and how quick can I get it done? I think the more time it takes to migrate an app, again, the more cost and the more risk that get introduced. And here you see some examples. Close to half of the customers that we surveyed deployed Postgres plus Advanced Server in 1 to 2 weeks or less. And I think that's an extraordinary statistic. I think it's one that surprises new users who are considering Postgres plus Advanced Server when they understand the power of the technology and the ease of migration to the technology. On slide 11, I just want to talk for a minute about what we do with Postgres. It has a license very similar to the BSD. It's technically the Postgres license, but it's, by all practical purposes, a BSD style license. We take what's available from the community. We contribute a lot of code through our own development here to the community, and then we build on that code and bring a structured product to market that's fully engineered, tested, certified on a variety of platforms so that we can give assurances, SLA assurances to our customers around the world on a 24/7 basis. As we develop around that technology, we add enhancements for usability, scalability, performance, and manageability in particular. We work to create value add to the technology by adding on. And that's represented in our Postgres Plus family of products. We take the pure community code, we make enhancements to it, we stay tightly synchronized continuously with whatever's available in the community is available through our distribution Postgres Plus to our customers. And at the high end of our offering, our Postgres Plus Advanced Server offering, we add the additional value add feature set of Oracle compatibility. And as we've watched more companies migrate to cloud-style deployments, we've created a superset product that really is a sophisticated cluster manager for Postgres that allows users to automatically scale a Postgres database in any cloud environment, including AWS, OpenStack, CloudStack, and others. Of course, to pull off this whole model, we bring a full portfolio of support and services and training to our customers to enable them to pick the technology and deploy it successfully. If you go to slide 12, I think we reveal a little bit through the survey one of the other things that we see as a driver for adoption, and that's in the area really as it relates to training and usability. We find that 70+% of those we surveyed using Postgres Plus Advanced Server had identified their ability to use their existing Oracle DBA skills as having a very big impact on productivity of their DBA team. And I think this idea can't be understated. The notion that making a move requires massive retraining, I think, is not the reality. The fact is those skills are very portable and can be leveraged in a new technology, again, reducing cost and reducing risk. If you look on slide 13, we think a little bit ahead. We asked our customers, what's your anticipated use of Postgres in production deployments in the next year? And what you'll notice here is over 50% said they expect to expand their use of Postgres in the next year. And I think that is another great indicator of the growing power and strength of the technology. And I think also a demonstration that the deployments that are underway are being successful, that their experience in getting support from EnterpriseDB is good and powerful, and that the ecosystem around Postgres is developing sufficiently fast enough to enable them to grow their deployment. we talk a little bit about the company, and let me again, reiterate, we're the largest commercial entity that's exclusively dedicated to Postgres. We really bring the benefits of Postgres together with the commercial reliability, dependability, and the resources and support needed to enable organizations to do enterprise-class deployments and have the backing of a company they can get an SLA and guaranteed response times and support from with a fully engineered product. So to engineer that product, we enhance it. We talked about it a little bit with security enhancements, performance enhancements. We've added Oracle compatibility and a whole set of tools for monitoring, management, and usability. The kind of last point is we do that on a global basis. We have offices now around the world, and we support customers in all time zones and in all regions. The last slide on 15, just a quick comment on how EnterpriseDB helps its customers. We recognize that transforming an IT infrastructure, particularly in databases, is a complex and can be quite a long process. And so we help our customers at every stage of that transformation, from investigation to looking at proof of concept and testing the technology. Once we succeed there, we help in the areas of helping actually migrate applications and get those applications deployed on Postgres, and then moving into full production use and production support. And so while the product we offer, Postgres Plus Advanced Servers, offered with a subscription for production support, we spend an extraordinary amount of time in our early relationships with customers, helping them go from the idea of deploying Postgres all the way through the planning, testing, and implementation up to the point of production. This talks a little bit about that. So I know I've covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, and I'm happy to stop and answer any questions you have, Rich.
Well, great. Thanks for that, Ed. I worked for Sun Microsystems many years, and we used to have a saying that you would date your server vendor, but you were married to your data. And it sounds like what you've portrayed here is that picture is kind of changing out there in the enterprise.
I think you're right, Rich, and it has for a lot of reasons. It's in the end, businesses have to be pragmatic, and the demands on organizations to grow has I think grown substantially, but the costs associated with their IT infrastructure are at least growing as fast as their top lines, and companies are taking action on that. And when database sits at the top of the stack as the most expensive single line item for support, and there are price performance alternatives like Postgres Plus Advanced Server, now we're seeing IT organizations can no longer justify that difference, given the improvements in this technology and the amount of use cases and reference points that suggest it doesn't have to be as expensive as it has been.
Yeah. So the cost case sounds really strong, but what would they be giving up to migrate away from something like an Oracle database?
Well, I think the giving up is the comfort of working with the vendor for a lot of years that they've come to know. In many cases, they come to trust and respect those vendors. Certainly, the technologies are good technologies. We know that, but I think that's what we're seeing is that's offset substantially by the need to improve cost. And I think in that equation, it's not good enough to be comfortable with your existing vendor.
Yeah. Well, Ed, we've talked about people with existing databases and the pain they're suffering there, but what about startups and new ventures that are building a database and they're looking at technologies? What do you have to offer for those kinds of folks?
It's a great question, Rich. So first of all, I think the code, the Postgres code that comes from the community is extraordinarily good. The community team releases a technology that's well documented. It's an excellent starting point for companies. We have many customers come to us. They download and install Postgres that they get from us or from the .org, and they need help with training or they need help with lightweight services. And in some cases, we'll do we'll do subscription support for that customer. So there's a lot to get. They don't necessarily have to get Postgres plus Advanced Server to get started with Postgres, and we think that's a great starting point. More and more, since we launched in the beginning of 2012 Postgres plus Cloud Database, and that is available to customers on Amazon Web Services. And what we've seen now is we have several hundred customers who fit exactly the category that you just described, who are building their companies in a web-centric, online-centric fashion, and they're starting with Postgres plus Cloud Database as the database service supporting their application, which has been built entirely for an online deployment. And I think that's another great starting point. They're defining their companies differently from the start. They're defining their companies not to have on-premise infrastructure, but to use entirely off-premise cloud or hosted infrastructure to build their entire businesses. And in that setting, I think we have proven the ability to shine. Again, all the attributes of the open source database, including the price performance attributes, go along with it. And I think that's another great way for companies in that class to get started with Postgres.
Yeah. Well, and I guess kind of a wrap-up question here. I was going to ask you about how easy it is to kick the tires on this. Is something like a cloud service? Is that the way to go?
I think so. If you want it, we've set up on AWS. It's very easy to set up and provision a multi-node Postgres cluster through Postgres plus Cloud Database. You can find out more about that at EnterpriseDB.com. I think that's a great way to get started. We certainly see developers who want to set up an easy and simple sandbox can do that quickly and easily. And then, frankly, given that we deal with so many enterprises of substance, meaning they're large infrastructures, they may not have a practice of trialing the technology in the cloud. They come to us, and we have trial versions of Postgres, and we have a whole methodology for helping them spin up a sandbox and try an application on Postgres, so we can help them with that and bring the inevitable training and services that are needed to get a good trial off the ground.
Well, terrific. Well, Ed, I want to thank you once again for coming on the show today.
Great. Thanks, Rich. My pleasure.
You bet. Okay, folks, that's it for the Rich Report. Stay tuned for more news and information on the world of big data.